Welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology. This is Mr. Adolf, and we are going to get into our next unit now on the blood. Now, blood is very much related to the last unit we covered, which is the cardiovascular system. Now, in that section, we focus mainly on the heart and heart function, but we also talked about the blood vessels and the differences between them. Now, what are we going to talk about now? We're going to talk about what's actually in. The whole point of the cardiovascular system is to transport this stuff we call blood. Now, blood is a great indicator of a person's health. That is why if you go to the doctor and they're trying to figure out what's wrong with you, one of the first things they'll do is they'll take your blood because it's an excellent window into a person's health. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual structure and function of blood, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so first of all, we talked about tissues, right? There's 4 types of tissues in the human body. Blood is one of them. Blood is actually going to be connective tissue. Now, that might seem strange because when we think about connective tissue, we think about ligaments and bones and tendons, things that are solid and structurally sound. That is not the case with blood, but blood is still connective tissue. Because what makes something connective tissue is cells that exist in a matrix. Now, blood is exactly that. The cells that we're going to talk about are going to be your red, white, blood cells and platelets. And then the matrix is going to be, in this case, it's going to be a liquid matrix. And that's what makes blood unique in terms of connective tissue. All the other connective tissues are solid, but blood, even though it's liquid, it's still technically connective tissue because it's cells that exist in a matrix. In this case, the matrix is just a liquid. A couple more structural components, physical components about blood. pH. pH is a measurement of, how much hydrogen or hydroxide is in something. And it's, different pHs allow for the growth of different types of bacteria, viruses. It also allows for enzymes to function correctly. And our pH level is dictated mainly by our blood. And our blood has a pH of around 7. Now, it's not exactly 7. It's not neutral. It's slightly basic. It's actually going to be closer to the 7.35, 7.45 in that range there. So it's going to be slightly basic, but still almost neutral. Volume-wise, the average adult human, male, has about 5 liters of blood, which is not that much when you really think about it. Think about a 2-liter bottle of soda. That's 2.5 bottles of soda, and that's the amount of blood in your average adult male. So while it's a good amount, it's not a ton, and that is why it doesn't take a whole lot of blood loss to become a problem. If you bleed and you lose more than, a couple pints of blood, that starts to be almost deadly. So we got to keep our blood in our blood vessels. Temperature-wise, our blood is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that might be surprising because our temperature is 98.6 degrees. But the reason why our temperature is 98.6 degrees is because our muscles are pumping away, keeping our bodies warm, and also our blood is holding on to that heat because blood is mostly water. And hopefully you remember from back in, chemistry class and biology class that water is an excellent heat sink, which means it holds on to heat. So your blood is mainly water, and that allows for that temperature to be a little higher. And you've felt that before if you've ever cut yourself. If you've ever cut yourself before, your blood feels warm on your skin, and that is because your blood is warmer than your skin. And your skin is in contact with the outside air, so that's going to keep it a little bit cooler. So the surface of your body is going to be a little bit cooler than your actual blood. In terms of how much weight it takes up of your body weight, it's about 8% of your body weight. So it's not a huge significant amount of your body weight, but it's there. Now, in terms of color, if I were to ask you what color is blood, you would say red because it's red. It's obviously red. You've seen it before. But there's actually 2 different variations of red, and that depends on whether or not oxygen is present. You've only ever seen oxygenated blood if it's on, if you're bleeding, because as soon as the blood leaves your skin, it's oxygenated because there's oxygen in the air, and it turns into a very bright red color. That is going to be that scarlet oxygen-rich color. But if it's not oxygenated, it's actually going to be a darker red color. Now, you may have heard before or seen before that blood could be blue. That is not true. There are some organisms, like for example, horseshoe crabs, they have blue blood, but that is because they have copper in their blood, and that turns into a bluish color. But our blood is never actually blue. It may look blue through your skin if you look at your skin. If you have light skin like I have like really pale light skin, I'm Russian, so that's going to be a lighter skin, and that you can see my blood vessels through my skin and they look blue. But the reason that's the case is because of how light hits your skin. It's not because the blood is actually blue. It never turns blue. It's going to be a darker red if there's no oxygen present. And now what's the job of your blood? Well, blood's got a few jobs. The most important and the most obvious one is going to be transportation. Your blood is like the subway system of the body, picking up oxygen, bringing it to the cells, and picking up carbon dioxide and getting rid of it. Also, nutrients. When you digest your food, all that food gets broken down in your small intestine and absorbed by your blood, and then that blood gets carried to the liver, where it gets, those components get restructured into new proteins, or it gets brought directly to your cells in the form of, in terms of glucose and blood sugar, and that is all being carried around your blood vessels. Also, responsible for keeping your body temperature where it needs to be, maintaining homeostasis. And finally, when you think about blood, we're all sitting at home right now because of this terrible virus that is affecting our entire planet. And our immune system, which hopefully you guys are all healthy, our immune system is really our blood. That's the part of our blood that is responsible for preventing infection. So we're going to talk more about that in detail. And also blood loss. Our blood is built to not get lost, essentially. So when you cut yourself, there's components in your blood that prevent it from leaving the blood vessels, and those are going to be your platelets. So we're going to be talking about all these in detail. What is your blood made up of? Well, when you break down the blood, it's actually broken into two major components, the solid part and the liquid part. So let's talk about the solid part first. That's going to be your, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment, but your solid part is going to be made up of three specific types of cells: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells are called erythrocytes. White blood cells are called leukocytes, and there's actually a bunch of different types of white blood cells. We're going to get into detail on each one. And then finally, we have our platelets, which are called thrombocytes. This little diagram over here, this little image over here is going to give you a good indication of those three types. We've got our red blood cells here. We have our white blood cells, or these larger blobby looking guys, and then our platelets are kind of mixed in there. We're going to finish up here talking about something called hematocrit, or packed cell volume. So basically, when you go give blood, one of the things we're looking at is how much of your blood is made up of red blood cells. Are there enough red blood cells there? Are there too little? Are there too many? How many white blood cells are there? And, compare the amount of liquid to solid. So the solid part of your blood, which we just talked about, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets, that is going to be called your hematocrit, or your packed cell volume. So if you take a look at this diagram over here, this shows you an image of a test tube, and that test tube has the blood broken down into its three major components. Well, actually four major components. This top part is going to be the liquid part, which is the plasma. This bottom part is the solid part, which is the hematocrit, and then that hematocrit is really broken down into the erythrocytes, which are the red blood cells. The white blood cells here and the platelets are going to make up a very thin band, and this just shows you the amounts of each. Now, only about 45% of your blood is actually solid. The other 55% is going to be this liquid portion here, which is that matrix that we talked about. And it's made up of mainly water, but it also has nutrients in there and proteins. That's why it's not clear. It's actually a yellowish color, and that is because of the proteins in there. So if you go give blood, let's say, at a doctor's office, they're going to take that blood and they're going to spin it in something called a centrifuge. And that centrifuge is going to separate the components out into the heavier to the lighter based on centripetal force. So if you've ever gone to the fair before and you've ever ridden that ride called the Gravitron that spins around really quickly, and you get in there and as soon as it starts spinning, you get plastered against the wall. You can't move away from the wall, and that's because of that centripetal force. Well, they use that same concept to separate out the blood. So I'm going to show you guys a quick little video that will hopefully explain that, and then we'll finish up with that. You can see in this video that they are taking a sample of the patient's blood and they're going to put it into this machine in which they're going to spin it. Okay, so as you could see in that video clip, you could see that they were able to determine what percentage of that blood was actually solid, and that was 41%, which is actually a little low. Normal's about 45%. So that is how doctors can take a quick look at it and say, hey, does this patient have too much or too little of the type of blood cells? And they can use that to then diagnose. Now, that is not to make a serious diagnosis. That's just to get a quick window into what's going on there. If they want to really analyze the blood, they're going to have to then go to histologist, pathologist, and they're going to have to analyze that under a microscope and see what's going on with the actual blood cells. Thank you very much.